But as Senator Collins and I have said, from the start of these hearings, we are very determined to get back to regular order and make sure we pass the funding necessary to keep our families safe and healthy and keep our nation competitive. And that simply has to include providing robust funding for the National Institutes of Health. If we want to continue to lead on the world stage, we have to continue our global dominance in biomedical research. Our nation is a leading light here. I should know. I come from Washington State. We have many world-class institutions. And I couldn't disagree more with the House Republicans, whose proposal to slash NIH funding would mean we will fall behind and fail to keep investing in these breakthroughs that have truly made a world of difference for patients across our country and across the globe. We've got to build on that critical progress we've been making and ensure that our investments keep pace, not slash them, as House Republicans voted to do. You know, after a global pandemic that brought the world economy to a grinding halt and cost more than 1 million American lives, House Republicans are seriously suggesting that we slash funding for life-saving research. So if we truly care about protecting families, we need to understand that this funding is just as critical as the investments we make in our military. And we cannot forget the millions of families who are fighting cancer and Alzheimer's, substance use disorders, long COVID, and so much more. We have to make sure that our investments reflect the reality that illness is one of our nation's deadliest adversaries and biggest economic and national security threats. As I mentioned, we saw that all too clearly during the COVID pandemic, but we also saw the incredible pace of discovery with COVID vaccines. There was no accident. It was made possible by our investments in research into mRNA vaccines in response to Ebola and other viruses, and by a premier biomedical research enterprise that we have strategically built over decades. And in the bipartisan pandemic response bill that I got signed into law last Congress, I'm glad that we were able to establish ARPA-H to continue strengthening our capacity for cutting-edge research. So I look forward to hearing from the witnesses today about the resources we need across NIH to continue supporting this life-saving work. Because at the end of the day, what we get for these investments are really important discoveries that keep our nation competitive, that prepare us for pandemics and other health crises, and give families more time with their loved ones and give patients hope for the future. That's not just worth the cost. It is priceless. So I hope we all remember that as House Republicans have now voted for deeply unserious and deeply dangerous cuts to cutting-edge life-saving research, in the Senate, we need to make sure that we are continuing to fund these important and critical investments. So I'm glad to be here today and speak to our witnesses. And Dr. Tabak, I am a huge supporter of NIH, but I have to ask you a tough question today. I have been pressing NIH for years about how to ensure that federal dollars are not flowing to researchers who harass or bully or retaliate against or even create a hostile environment for their colleagues and for their students, and how to ensure NIH workers themselves are not continuing to experience harassment. So I have to say I am really appalled by recent reporting that an NIH-funded scientist who faced institutional disciplinary action because he was found to have sexually harassed colleagues was simply able to transfer his award from one university to another research institute where he then harassed a trainee in his new lab. And even worse, NIH awarded him a new $2.5 million grant. That happened despite the fact that Congress directed NIH to make it mandatory for institutions to inform NIH when scientists or key staff are removed or otherwise disciplined due to harassment, bullying, retaliation, or hostile working conditions. Despite NIH posting publicly that you require notification from all of your award recipients, despite NIH's knowledge of the investigation's finding, and I just have to say it is completely unacceptable. So I need to ask you today, what is NIH doing to fully implement the requirement under last year's law that such actions must be reported to the agency, and how are you using that requirement to enforce workplace protections against harassment?
Chair Murray, I want to assure you that we take this issue very, very seriously. We've handled over 650 allegations of harassment, discrimination, and hostile work environments. We have dedicated staff addressing these allegations, and about 30% of those allegations have been substantiated. In dozens of cases, principal investigators were removed from grants. The issue that you point out this morning, the so-called pass the harasser problem, we of course are well aware of that. In the specific case, unfortunately, the original institution was not completely forthcoming about the extent of the investigator's behavior, and it was only after the individual's grant was allowed to transfer to the second institution that we became aware of the greater severity of what the issues were. We are now working with the second institution to understand what the most recent allegations are, and I can assure you that if these allegations are sustained, we will take immediate action as required.
Okay, well, I want to follow up with you. I'm out of time, but I want to find out how you are making clear to these institutions and your grantees that these behaviors are not being accepted, and what you're doing to make sure that our NIH workers themselves are not experiencing harassment. Because at the end of the day, innovation isn't just driven by programs, it is driven by people. And we need the best and the brightest. And if this is what they see around them, we are going to lose them. So this is critical. Thank you.